Hello everyone. If you saw last week's show, then you will remember that we were at the beach, and in fact I actually stood in the shallows of the sea and painted the view out across the water. And the video I posted was a point of view video. In other words, it was my view of the scene and the painting as it developed. And here's the finished pic. But that same day at Dawlish Warren, the beach on the south coast of Devon, I also created 3 other paintings. One with me just sitting on the sand using my field easel. So this is the view I was painting off beyond the easel there. And here's a look at the finished work. And then after a quick peach tea and a little experiment to see whether driftwood works as well as the Winsor & Newton field easel. Shocker, it doesn't. I headed back to the water and I did 2 further paintings. And I'll show you those in just a second. But if you look at the video footage here, or actually just a little bit before, you can actually see, we can see now actually, that I use the bottom of the painting in each case as my palette. And it's a really neat way to work when you're out in the field. And the little easel, this is the 3rd painting by the way, nice hazy light, and then here's the 4th painting which really brings out the colours of the scene. And I thought that it's a little complicated to try and do commentary with all the background noise and standing in the sea and doing the painting at the same time. So what I thought I would do is a little studio demonstration of some of the techniques I used. So what I did for all 4 paintings I painted on that day was I started off with a watercolour marker and popped in the horizon line. Now, you've probably seen me use some of these watercolour markers before if you're familiar with the channel. They have both a brush tip and a narrow nib. And as you can see, I'm using the narrow nib here because I just want some simple line work to block in the horizon line, not to block in, sorry, to draw out reasonably loosely and simply the distant landscape and the horizon line. And I start typically with a Prussian blue, just because I like using blue a lot for my line work. I feel it really complements the other colours I use in my palette, and it's also kind of easy to hide a line in amongst the sky or the sea in this circumstance, should I make a mistake. So I'm just popping in the distant hills here. And then after a quick spray with the water bottle to make the paint flow smoothly and give me a slippy surface, I've just put in some sky with horizontal brush strokes using a flat 1-inch brush, a mix of titanium white and celurium blue. Now you'll notice that some of the line work I did has started to run, and that's an effect I'm using more and more recently. If you happen to see the video a couple of weeks back, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, of me painting a beach scene at Sidmouth, I actually deliberately kept some of the watercolour that had run due to the spray bottle in the finished painting. And now I'm adding a mix of cobalt blue and titanium white, added with a variety of sort of dilutions of paint and different wetnesses on the surface of the painting, sometimes dry brush, just to quite quickly introduce a variation in tone and texture and a certain random element that you get when you're looking at the sea. And I'm coming in here now having added cobalt blue and magenta, although I must admit it doesn't look too much like it on my screen, but there is actually some magenta in there. Now, down at Dawlish Warren, the sort of reddish orangey hue of the sand often shows through and or gets stirred up in the water as the waves lap in. And certainly when I was standing in the shallows, you could totally see these bright oranges and reds. And so I've included some of those in the foreground Now, when you look off to the distant water, what you're mostly getting is the reflection of the light off the surface of the water. So for the most part, it tends to look bluey off in the distance. It does depend on the colour of the sky. I was down at Fistral Beach in Cornwall just the other week, and there were these, it was a beautiful day, but there were these ominous deep purple clouds, and they really were reflecting off the water, so the water was very much purpley off in the distance in that case. But what I've just done for this particular painting is use some ultramarine blue mixed with titanium white, and just perhaps a little bit of red there I think as well, to just put in a pale purpley grey off on the very distant hills. And now I'm just putting in a more golden version of that same colour, so I've added some cadmium red and some cadmium yellow for the nearer hills, and now a little bit of cobalt blue to pop in some distant foliage, just popping in some indications of little trees up on the hill line there. And now for this little hill, I notice there's also a little archway in the cliff off on the left there, which I neglected to fill in. Should have used the same background colour that I used earlier, but I'm using kind of a purpley shade here, pretty dilute, almost a wash really. And at the moment I'm allowing some of the first coat of blue to show through, but I'm just picking up a little bit of extra blue to fill in that little archway there in the rocks. And now coming in with some deeper purples to introduce further texture and shadow. And one of the great things actually about painting the Devon coast is the huge range of colours you get. Obviously you've got all the colours of the water and the sky, and then in amongst the countryside as well, the cliffs can be, depending on where you are, they can be white, orange, red. You've got all the the different greens of the countryside with the different crops as well. You could have yellows if it's oilseed rape. And with the weather the way it is at the moment, things are getting quite burned up, so you're getting a lot of oranges and browns in the countryside as well. But what I've just done is used a deeper purple again to block in that central rock, that Dawlish Warren itself, and now I'm using a deep ultramarine blue based colour to put in the shadowy regions of the tree-lined hilltop there on the right, and I'm adding in some greens on top of that to pick out some sort of mid-tones, and also a little burst of green on top of the central rock formation as well. Now, one of the things with the interactive acrylic is that if you just spray the paint with your water bottle and then drag your brush through, you can kind of get these wonderful frayed edges and subtle mixing effects. And so that's well worth investigating if you haven't done so already. And now I'm popping in a much warmer orangey brown now, which is much closer to the true colour of the cliffs and the sort of sea wall that you see on the right below the tree-covered hill. Coming back into the water next, adding in some deeper purples to represent the sort of shadowy regions you get as the water ripples. And you can see I'm being really quite loose with the brush. What I'm trying to do here is simulate in the studio the way I would paint if I was still at the beach. So, you don't have... typically, the day I was at the beach, it was an absolutely beautiful day. So I didn't really have to worry too much about the weather. But typically, in the UK at least, you've got to work fairly quickly when you're working outside. Even if the weather stays nice, the lighting will change quite quickly. So obviously I've speeded this footage up by a factor of 2, but even so, I was working fairly quickly anyway. And so I'm being very loose. I'm just popping in patches of colour and light here. I'm popping in some white water. Not thinking about it too much. I'm letting the brush roll across the surface of the painting. If the paint runs out, I'm using that dry brush effect to my advantage. I'm changing the angle of the brush as it sits down on the paper. So that gives me a certain amount of randomness that you get, within nature, within swirling water. And, sometimes it works better than others. Sometimes you've just got to kind of go for it and see what you get. And a little tip I think I've mentioned before in previous videos, if you get something you're not sure about with one of these outdoor paintings, just put it away in your folder for, a few weeks, and then look at it again, and you may see it from a different point of view and think, oh, actually, ugh, I really hate that, and you will want to correct it. But on other occasions, you think, wow, actually that's actually okay. I didn't realize what I'd achieved there. And you can see that what I'm doing here now is really experimenting with colour. So, just because I'm outside and I've got the reference right in front of me, doesn't mean I'll follow the colours exactly. So you can see I put a sort of wavy line going from the middle of the foreground off up into the distance with a mix of blue and pure red. And, there wasn't really any pure red in the scene, but I thought I'd give that a try for this demonstration. Going back into the hillside now, just adding a little more, a couple more tufts for the trees. And really, looking at this again, I could have almost left this little demo there, but I carried on working on it and added some, when you see light reflected off of wet sand or very shallow water, what you'll often see is darker and less dark patches where you've got different depths of water. So that's kind of what I'm introducing here. And then what I will do later is add highlights over the top of that. Now this is a really nice way to describe water, is to spray the painting with water, especially if you're using the interactive acrylics, and then lift off some of that wet paint, some of that top layer, with a piece of paper towel. And if you've got a multitude of colours beneath that, you'll get these wonderful speckled effects, which really work to help describe wet surfaces and things like that. Now, I've decided now to come in with some even bolder colours, try and bring the foreground forward more. So I'm coming in with this brighter version and a redder version of the colour I used for the seawall off on the right of the waterline, off in the distance there, below the tree-lined hill. And I'm also adding some deep purples as well. And really just letting the brush wander. I've gone back to a big brush, you notice. So I often do this. If I kind of find I'm getting a little bit too fiddly, getting a little bit too involved with detail, then what I'll do is I'll force myself to be bold, go back to a big brush. I'm using A3 paper here, so a 1-inch brush is quite sizable for that size of painting, although I've now switched back to the 1/2-inch brush, coming with some very deep ultramarine blue based line work. Once again, spraying the surface of the painting to keep things fluid, and really just letting the brush wander over the surface to create this meandering pattern of lines. And then I'm using the space or the shape that was created naturally between two of those lines, and I've filled that in with a darker colour. And then on the left there, I just introduced some upsweeping, very light brush strokes to suggest a fairly small wave coming in diagonally, travelling diagonally down and to the right. And now I've picked up some pure white and some magenta. So again, another colour experiment. And I'm just rolling that. I haven't mixed the colours together. There are both colours on the brush. And I'm just letting that roll over the paper, using some dry brush, picking out little bursts of white water. Experimenting with all the effects that you can get. So what I always want with my artwork, whether I'm painting a cup and saucer, or whether I'm painting an animal, or whether I'm painting, a vast landscape, I'm always trying to create something new to me each time. So, I go back to my traditional techniques, the things I use over and over again, but I'm always trying to be fairly spontaneous. And what I'm doing now is just dragging some pure titanium white, just the very tips of the brush, or that's what I was doing before. I'm putting it down a little bit more heavily now, but I'm getting kind of a dry brush effect by letting the brush skim across the paint, and that helps to create the illusion of some sparkle on the water. So that's pretty much it for the studio demo. Let me just show you a close-up of the demo piece that I just showed you. So there we go. You can notice I decided to trim a little bit off the bottom of the painting there. And now let me just show you my favourite painting of the day, which I showed you earlier, but I'll just give you another look, which was actually painted while down at the beach. So there we go. Hope you found the little studio demo helpful, and hopefully you got some ideas that you can maybe apply if you're out at the beach painting away or out in the countryside, wherever it is. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments below the video. If you enjoyed watching, please remember to press like. And of course, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you next Sunday for the next episode of The Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.